Welcome to Enternal Love Diaries, where real stories change real lives. Every love carries a story, and here, each one is told from the heart. Today's story takes us into the lives of Elara and Silas, an unlikely couple who faced judgment from the moment they stood side by side. Elara was delicate, a poised classical pianist raised in high society, while Silas was a mountain of a man, a scarred construction foreman with hands the size of dinner plates. Their physical differences were jarring to everyone who saw them, sparking whispers that he was too rough, too large, and too dangerous for someone as fragile as her. Even her own mother issued a chilling warning about the pain he would inevitably cause her. But as they arrive at their honeymoon destination, a prestigious resort where all eyes are on them, Elara prepares to reveal a secret about her husband that no one expects. What happens on the dance floor that night will silence the critics and redefine what it means to be a perfect match. The whisper sliced through the elegant hum of the wedding reception like a jagged knife, louder and more vicious than the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Elara froze, her hand hovering over the tiered white cake, her eyes darting toward the source of the voice. It was a cousin from her father's side, a woman who had never approved of anything Elara did, leaning in to whisper to a horrified aunt. "Just look at the size of him," the cousin hissed, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "He's a brute. He's going to crush her. It's unnatural, seeing a beast like that next to a porcelain doll." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, threatening to ruin the most important day of Elara's life. Standing beside her, Silas stiffened. He was 6'6", a towering wall of muscle and broad shoulders, encased in a tuxedo that had to be custom-made to accommodate his massive frame. He had the rough, weathered skin of a man who worked with steel and concrete, and a faint, jagged scar running down his left cheek, a souvenir from a construction accident years ago where he had saved a coworker's life. To the high society guests of Charleston, he looked less like a groom and more like a bodyguard who had wandered into the wrong party. He looked down at his new wife, his dark eyes filled with a familiar, heartbreaking apology. He gently pulled his hand away from hers, terrified that his mere touch would validate their cruel words. Elara felt the separation immediately. She looked up at him, her heart aching at the insecurity she saw in the man she loved more than anything. This was the dynamic that had defined their entire relationship. The world looking at Silas and seeing a monster, and Elara looking at him and seeing the only safe harbor she had ever known. She reached out and firmly took his hand back, her small, manicured fingers disappearing inside his callous, giant grip. She squeezed tight, signaling to him that she wasn't afraid, even if everyone else was. But the doubt in the room was palpable, a thick fog of judgment that followed them as they moved toward the center of the floor. The judgment hadn't started today, it had begun the moment they met 6 months ago. Elara had been struggling to move an antique grand piano in her studio, the heavy instrument refusing to budge on the old hardwood floors. Silas had been working on the building renovation next door. He had walked in, dusted off his hands, and moved the 1,000-pound instrument with an ease that terrified her at first. But then, he had stayed to fix a wobbly bench, his movements surprisingly precise and careful. When he spoke, his voice was a deep rumble, but his words were shy and polite. He asked her to play something. When she did, she saw tears in his eyes. That contrast, the physical power and the emotional vulnerability, had captivated her instantly. However, bringing Silas into her world was like introducing a wolf to a sheep pen. Elara came from old money, a world of country clubs, charity galas, and appearances. Silas came from the foster care system and hard labor. When she first introduced him to her mother, Mrs. Vance, the reaction was visceral. Her mother had actually recoiled when Silas extended a hand to greet her. Later that night, Mrs. Vance had sat Elara down in the library, her face pale with a mix of fear and disgust. That was when the warning was first uttered, the words that would haunt Elara all the way to the altar. "Elara, you are making a mistake that will leave you broken," her mother had said, her voice trembling. "Look at him. He is too big, too rough. He doesn't know how to handle things of value without breaking them. It's physics, darling. It's nature. He will hurt you. Maybe not on purpose, but his world is violence and force, and yours is grace. When the doors are closed, and his temper flares, or he simply moves the wrong way, you will be the one who pays the price." Elara had stormed out, furious, but the seed of anxiety had been planted by the sheer conviction in her mother's voice. Now, at the wedding, that anxiety rippled through the guests. Every time Silas moved, people flinched. When he picked up a delicate glass, guests held their breath, expecting it to shatter. The tension was exhausting. Silas, usually the rock, was crumbling under the scrutiny. He leaned down, whispering into her ear, "Elara, maybe we should leave early. They're staring at me like I'm going to eat the centerpiece. I'm ruining this for you." His voice cracked, the sound of a man who wanted to be invisible despite being the largest thing in the room. "We are not leaving," Elara whispered back fiercely, though her own smile was becoming strained. "We are going to our honeymoon. We are going to the resort, and we are going to forget all of these people." She was trying to convince herself as much as him. She knew that the resort she had booked, the Gilded Palm in Florida, was just as exclusive and judgmental as her family's circle. She had booked it to prove a point, to show that they belonged anywhere they chose to be. But now, looking at Silas's hunched shoulders, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The departure from the reception was a blur of forced smiles and rice thrown with a little too much force. As they settled into the vintage convertible, Elara felt a wave of relief, but the silence in the car was heavy. Silas drove with extreme caution, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He was terrified of proving them right. He was terrified that his size, his clumsiness, his very existence was a burden to the delicate flower he had married. He glanced at her, his eyes searching for regret in her expression. "Are you sure, Elara?" he asked softly. "You could have had anyone. A doctor, a lawyer, someone who fits in the pictures. I chose you, Silas," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I love you, not despite who you are, but because of who you are." But even as she said it, she remembered the warning. "He's too big. It'll hurt." She knew Silas would never hurt her intentionally, but the world was convinced that his roughness was incompatible with her lifestyle. They needed a win. They needed a moment where the world didn't just tolerate them but understood them. She didn't know how that would happen, but she prayed the honeymoon would offer a chance to reset. They arrived at the Gilded Palm late that evening. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and gold, populated by couples who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. When Silas walked in, carrying 4 suitcases as if they were lunchboxes, the room went quiet. The concierge looked from Elara to Silas and actually hesitated before handing over the key card. "We have reinforced the bed frame, as requested," the man muttered, a snide comment disguised as helpfulness. Silas flinched as if he'd been slapped. Elara felt a surge of rage, but she kept her head high, taking Silas's arm and marching him toward the elevators. The next 2 days were a trial. At the pool, Silas refused to take off his shirt, conscious of his scars and his bulk compared to the trim, tanned bodies around him. At dinner, he ate with excruciating slowness, terrified of spilling something or using the wrong fork. He was making himself small, diminishing his spirit to fit into a box that wasn't built for him. Elara watched her vibrant, strong husband fade into a shadow of himself. The judgment of strangers was doing exactly what her mother predicted. It was hurting her, by breaking the man she loved. The breaking point came on the 3rd evening. The resort was hosting its famous Moonlight Gala, a black tie dinner and dance competition that was the highlight of the season. Elara had always loved dancing. It was where she felt most alive. She had packed a stunning emerald gown, hoping to share a dance with Silas. But when she mentioned the gala, Silas shook his head, panic rising in his chest. "No, Elara, I can't. Look at me. I'm like a bull in a china shop. If I step on your foot, I'll break it. Everyone is waiting for me to crush you. I can't give them that satisfaction." Elara sat on the edge of the bed, the silk of her dress pooling around her. "Silas, you have never hurt me. Not once. Yet," he said, his voice ragged. "But they're right. I'm too big for this world, Elara. I'm too big for that dance floor. I'll trip. I'll fall. I'll make you a laughingstock." He stood up and walked to the balcony, staring out at the ocean, a giant silhouette against the moonlight. "Maybe your mother was right. Maybe love isn't enough when the pieces don't fit." This was the cliffhanger of their relationship. If they didn't go to that dance, if Silas hid away tonight, the fear would win. The warning would become their reality. not because he physically hurt her, but because the fear of his size destroyed their joy. Elara knew she had to do something drastic. She stood up, walked to the balcony, and did something she had never done. She grabbed his face with both hands and forced him to look at her, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. Cliffhanger. You listen to me, Silas Vance, she commanded, her voice shaking with emotion. Tonight isn't about them. It's about us. I don't care if we fall. I don't care if people laugh. But if we hide, we are admitting that we don't belong together. You are my husband, and tonight, you are going to dance with me. If you trust me, if you truly love me, you will put on that suit and walk downstairs with me. Do you trust me? The question hung between them, charged with the weight of their future. Silas looked into her eyes, seeing the desperate hope there. He took a shuddering breath, the fear warring with his love for her. Slowly, agonizingly, he nodded. I trust you, he whispered. But Elara, if I hurt you. You won't, she promised. But as they dressed in silence, the tension was thick enough to choke on. They took the elevator down to the ballroom, the doors sliding open to reveal a sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos. The music stopped for a split second as they entered. The stares were immediate. The whispers started again. There's the giant, someone murmured. Is he really going to try to dance? The skepticism was a physical weight pushing against them. Silas's hand was trembling in hers. They found a table in the back, but the master of ceremonies announced the start of the competition. Couples flooded the floor, moving in synchronized, practiced perfection. It was intimidating. These were people who had taken lessons for years. Silas looked like he was about to bolt. Elara, I can't, he choked out. Look at them. They're floating. I'm an anchor. Stand up, Elara said, her heart pounding against her ribs. She pulled him to his feet. The crowd parted as they approached the floor, creating a wide circle, not out of respect, but out of a desire to see the spectacle. To see the disaster. To see the big man crush the little woman. The DJ, sensing the moment, switched the track. It wasn't a fast song. It was a slow, complex waltz, the kind that required perfect balance and control. A trap. Silas froze in the center of the floor. He looked down at his massive feet, then at Elara's tiny satin sandals. The warning screamed in his head. He's too big. It'll hurt. He started to pull away, to retreat, to save her from the pain. Look at me, Elara whispered, placing her left hand on his shoulder and gripping his right hand. Just me. No one else exists. The music swelled. The first beat dropped. And in that moment, Elara did something that shocked everyone. She didn't lead. She didn't try to manage him. She completely surrendered her weight to him, leaning back into a deep dip before the dance even began. A gasp went through the crowd. If Silas dropped her, she would hit the marble floor hard. But he didn't. Silas's instincts took over. His massive arm caught her with the gentleness of a feather landing on water. He pulled her up, and suddenly, the years of physical labor, the balance required to walk steel beams high in the air, the strength needed to hold up walls, it all translated into movement. He wasn't clumsy. He was grounded. He was powerful. They began to move. And it wasn't just dancing, it was storytelling. Elara was light and airy, spinning and twirling, but Silas was the fulcrum, the solid earth around which she orbited. He lifted her effortlessly, holding her high above his head as she arched her back, a move that would have caused any other man to tremble under the strain. Silas held her as if she weighed nothing, his face a mask of intense concentration and adoration. The crowd went silent. The snickering stopped. The whispers died. They watched as the monster moved with a grace that defied physics. His large strides covered the floor in sweeping, majestic arcs. He protected her, sheltered her, and elevated her. Every time the crowd thought he would step on her, he pivoted with millimeter precision, his large feet moving nimbly, guiding her away from the edge of the crowd. The contrast that everyone mocked suddenly became the most beautiful thing in the room. His darkness made her light shine brighter, his strength gave her the freedom to fly. Elara looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. You see, she breathed, breathless from a spin. You fit perfectly. Silas smiled, a genuine, blinding smile that transformed his scarred face. For the first time, he didn't feel too big. He felt capable. He realized that his size wasn't a weapon to be feared, but a shield to protect the woman he loved. He spun her again, capturing her waist, and they glided across the floor in perfect harmony. The song reached its crescendo. Silas prepped for the finale. He locked eyes with Elara, a silent question. She nodded. He gripped her waist and lifted her into the air, spinning her around his body before slowly, tenderly lowering her down until her face was inches from his. The music ended on a soft, lingering note. They stood there, chest to chest, breathing heavily, lost in their own world. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence in the ballroom. Then, the applause erupted. It wasn't polite clapping, it was thunderous. People were standing up. The cynicism of the elite crowd had been shattered by the undeniable beauty of their connection. The cousin who had whispered at the wedding, the mother who had warned of pain, the guests who had stared, they were all wrong. The warning, "He's too big, it'll hurt," had been completely misunderstood. His heart was too big to let her fall. His love was too big to be contained. A woman in the front row, wiping a tear from her eye, leaned over to her husband. "I've never seen anything like that," she said. "He makes her look like she's flying." Silas looked around the room, realizing the applause was for him, for them. He looked back at Elara, his eyes wet. "I didn't step on you," he said, his voice thick with relief. "No," Elara laughed, crying openly now. "You carried me. You always carry me." They walked off the dance floor, not as the odd couple, the mismatch, or the spectacle, but as the champions of the night. The concierge who had been rude earlier rushed over with a bottle of their finest champagne, bowing respectfully. "A magnificent performance, sir," he said to Silas. "Truly magnificent." Later that night, sitting on their balcony under the stars, the tension of the last few months finally evaporated. Silas stretched his legs out, relaxed for the first time in ages. "I spent my whole life thinking I took up too much space," he admitted quietly. "That I was just a bull in a china shop." Elara rested her head on his broad shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You aren't a bull, Silas. You're the foundation. You're the walls and the roof. People like my mother, they think strength is dangerous because they've never been truly protected. But tonight, you showed them. You showed everyone that being big doesn't mean you break things. It means you can hold things that are too heavy for anyone else." Silas kissed the top of her head. The warning had been silenced forever. The fear that his size would hurt her had been replaced by the knowledge that his size was exactly what she needed. He wasn't too big, the world's imagination was just too small. From that night on, the dynamic changed. When they walked down the street in Charleston, Silas didn't hunch his shoulders. He walked tall, proud of the space he occupied, with Elara happily holding his hand. The stares still happened, but they didn't sting anymore. They were armor-plated by the memory of that waltz. They knew the truth of their love. It was a perfect balance of power and grace, of earth and sky. Elara's mother eventually came around, though it took time. Seeing the way Silas cared for Elara, the way he built a custom studio for her with his own hands, the way he terrified anyone who dared to disrespect her, it eventually eroded her prejudice. She realized that while Silas might break a teacup occasionally with his large fingers, he would never break her daughter's heart. And in a world full of fragile men with fragile egos, Silas was a fortress. The story of Elara and Silas reminds us that compatibility isn't about looking the same or fitting into a template. It's about how two different souls complement each other. The world will always have warnings. People will always judge what they don't understand. They will look at the surface and make assumptions about danger, compatibility, and worth. But true love is the only thing that gets to decide who fits together. Silas thought his size was his greatest flaw, but Elara saw it as his greatest gift. By facing the fear and stepping onto that dance floor, they proved that gentleness is not the absence of strength, but the mastery of it. Sometimes, the very thing you are criticized for is the superpower that makes your relationship work. Don't let the whispers of the crowd drown out the music in your heart. We'd love to know, which country are you watching from? Drop a comment below. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, show your support by hitting the like button. Subscribe to Enternal Love Diaries for more stories that touch the heart and change perspectives. From Charleston, South Carolina, United States.